It's 5:30. It's time for Antithesis.
Good afternoon and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him. A couple of years ago, I went to the big Denver Cinco de Mayo celebration and fell against a wall laughing out loud as the mayor walked by, wearing an ornately embroidered red and gold sombrero de charro, a pastel-colored short-sleeved guayabera, brown plaid slacks, and his trademark jogging shoes. He was glad-handing the Mexicano crowd. It's hard to say Mexicano and Mexican. It's hard to pronounce that. And the mayor was having a hard time dealing with the fact that he was making his way through a Mexicano crowd, thinking that he was looking cool. I once dropped into a small bookstore in an affluent and virtually lily-white neighborhood. I talked with the shopkeeper and looked over various books. One of the books which caught my eye was about northern Mexican textiles. See, that time I said Mexican, not Mexican. I put on my white voice in order to soften my cholo impact, since the few other browsers in the store had stiffened when I'd entered the shop. I moved the conversation toward the topic of the colonization of the Southwest. I deliberately hedged around the issue of racism. I could tell that the other browsers were listening. I sweetened the debate with some discussion of Mexican textiles and of the Mexican artisan tradition, referring at times to the color photographs in the book. I drew them in with a couple of stories about my experiences living in rural Mexico. Then I struck. I betcha, I said almost innocently, that most of the people who buy this book love Mexican textiles, but they don't want to have nothing to do with Mexican people. You should have seen them, bocas abiertas, tragando moscas a todo dar, pobrecitos. Recently, I was reading a book, The Folk Arts of Southern Arizona. At one point, I called my wife. She came into the living room quickly with a concerned look on her face. She had heard a strange tone in my voice and thought that something might be wrong. I had a catch in my throat and tears were forming in my eyes as I said to her, "They've written a book about me and I don't think I like it." It was strange. On the one hand, I was proud of the geographical range of our culture. I was raised in California and in El Salvador, so seeing what we considered normal also occurring in Arizona was cool. But I was uncomfortable seeing on the printed page descriptions of the things which we do at home without any thought of art or folklore. There it was, all written up, nacimientos, home altars and backyard shrines, piñata making, candlelit religious processions at various times of the year, music and singing at parties, artificial flowers of tissue paper, our traditional paseo, the stroll around the park modernized into cruising on the boulevard in a lowrider if you have one, admiring the fine rides if you don't. And I thought, how far we've come from who we are. The author of the book even suggested to his readers that they visit Chicano churches and barrios, especially during December and important feast days, so that they can observe our quaint and colorful customs. I suppose that some persons would think that I should have been happy to see myself, to see us in print, but my reaction was very different. I felt and feel angry. I feel lessened, sad, and violated. I think that the idea that we can somehow be crammed into a book, that the endless possibilities of our daily lives can somehow be defined by 6 or 7 or 20 or 50 cultural behaviors. This is a problem faced by all people of any culture which falls outside of the so-called mainstream. a few of the things which we do are held up as if they define who we are, how we think, what we feel. Each disembodied part of us is then displayed as our folklore, and as a symptom of what is wrong with us. Frequently implied and often stated explicitly is that we'd all get our piece of the American dream if we just stopped being so doggedly ethnic. Well, I know that hyphenated Americans of German, English, French, Irish, among, other ancestries do also have traditional foods, music, dances, and handicrafts. But in order to be considered successfully assimilated into mainstream America where they can enjoy the American dream, these supposed cultural anachronisms are displayed only in sanctioned venues such as restaurants, theaters, festivals, and craft fairs. Wearing a kilt to work, or heating up sauerkraut or haggis or blood sausage in the workplace microwave is, for the typical Scotch American or German American, entirely out of the question.
I think heating up haggis is entirely out of the question.
Okay,
no matter where you are.
Why?
Oh
Okay, tell our listeners, what is haggis?
What is haggis anyway?
You don't know what haggis is?
I'm not quite sure.
How can you talk badly about it if you don't even know what it is? There you go. You fell for it. You are manifesting exactly the kind of cultural imperatives that I'm always, out here on a rave about. Why don't you know what haggis is, but then you complain about it before you even know what it is? If I brought you a plate, I said, I got haggis, you go, ah!
No.
And you go, you don't know. What is it? What's haggis?
I've seen haggis in movies, but you're catching me off guard. So
why do you act all...
Because that was my reaction at the time. I just remember it.
Why? What is it? You know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. I know what it is.
Tell me.
Pretty much.
What?
First of all, you kill generally a sheep.
First you kill a sheep.
Okay. Then after you cut it open and you're dealing with all of the innards, then you take the stomach.
Right.
And cut it away from everything else.
That's always a good idea.
And then you take what's inside of the stomach, which is generally a pretty strong greenish goop. Well, thick,
partially digested.
Thick. Yeah, partially digested, chewed up green stuff. Yeah. Then you take it, and it's powerful, man, because it's got all those stomach acids in it.
Right.
So then you take it over someplace and you put it in the right place on the ground, like
on the ground.
And then you bring it back, and then you wash it out really good. Then you turn the stomach. We turn the stomach inside out for our version of it.
Who's our?
People basically, man, all over Mesoamerica, the same thing. You do the
Eat
same
haggis?
thing in Mexico. Well, what we call it, it has different names. Morcilla is one name.
Do you like it?
I love it. I make it.
Oh, it just seems
when you cut. Okay, it works like this. No, when you cut the sheep's throat, you have a pan there to catch the blood, or the goat. I mean.
Perhaps we should go somewhere else with this conversation.
And then this is haggis. This is like Scotch food. And then you take all of the other. Then you take the other innards. And the good ones, like the liver and the kidneys and stuff like that. Yeah, this is how haggis is. We don't do that. We cook it separately. We just put the blood inside the stomach. You turn the stomach inside out, so it was now the clean outer layer, and it's very smooth and doesn't have all the little pupillary things that the other part of the stomach does. Then it's smooth in there, so you put the blood inside there, and haggis is made with the other innards. I think they put what we call the bofe, the lungs, I think kidneys and liver and heart and probably sweetbreads and I don't know what else. And then sew it up.
Means pancreas.
Yeah, and thyroid. Yeah, and thymus, I think, too. A bunch of those.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was just pancreas.
I don't know. I know what you're not supposed to eat, so then I take everything else. It's just like little pieces. Pancreas is part of it, but there's more.
What do you know?
And I just
New
put
gourmet
it all
lesson.
In a little pile there all together, because it's all
actually sweetbreads is good.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
And then the stomach is like sewn up. And to make morcilla, I generally boil it about 2 hours, anywhere from an hour and a half to maybe 3 hours. 2 hours,
and you feel insulted that I'm insinuating that you shouldn't do this in public.
Well, of course, it's our food, but that haggis, it's
our
Scotch food.
It's just food. It's food.
It's not your food.
It's scary food.
Are you?
How do you know it's not my food?
Because of the way you're acting.
Well,
maybe it is. Are you Scotch?
Hey, how do you know I'm not?
And everybody's people at some point, anybody that ever killed an animal knows, I guess there's certain Old Testament biblical injunctions, so punk people don't eat none of the blood, But it's good.
Okay.
Germans call it Blutwurst, which means blood sausage.
Right.
But anyhow, the point is, there you go. There you go. If there was genuine cultural tolerance, I was once with one of my good friends, man, bros, the late Jimmy Omura.
who we've talked about
Who
before
we talked about before.
on
He
this
was
show.
in his 80s, man, and we're cruising, and we had just gotten out of a big-time meeting where they were talking about cultural diversity and all that kind of stuff at the Rocky Mountain News, as a matter of fact, in the boardroom. Him and me are cruising back to his place, right? And I said, you know, actually we were using the gold-plated washroom on the same floor as the boardroom at the Rocky Mountain News. Gold-plated sinks, check it out.
Really?
Yeah.
Real gold?
I've been
Just
I
didn't
assume
look
so.
like
They got
gold.
gold on the coffee cups, and they had a little rim of gold around the big, giant, huge
executives.
board table. Yeah, so probably was gold in there too. Anyway, I was saying to him, you know, all this talk just makes me sick. Generally, when they talk about multicultural diversity, all they mean is people of color who walk, talk, think, dress, and act like white folks. And he goes, mm-hmm. I said, and you will know that there is true multicultural diversity when anybody working anywhere doesn't have to work and just open the refrigerator and take out whatever their most favorite food for the day is out of the leftovers that they got in there and take it to work, and they can warm it up and they can offer people some, and people aren't going to trip. And he agreed with me entirely, because he was talking about those days when no Asian would never take no rice balls, and I remember when I was a kid, you know, that even later, after being a kid, there's a whole trip, man, about how you didn't take stuff wrapped up in tortillas to work.
Well, and now people do. Now white people do it.
And they call them tortilla wraps. Please save me. That's exactly what I'm writing about.
Well, actually, you were talking about people writing about people.
That's a part of it.
And I'm not sure that I understand your feelings about being lessened.
Well, there you go.
Someone is noticing your art. We'll use your in the larger cultural
yeah,
your.
not necessarily noticing, but the idea that what are otherwise that these few behaviors somehow sum it up because of the paternalism that is inherent with Eurogenic culture. Anytime that you can address a people in this way, they are less than, and the point of that is that there is no folklore of this thing that called itself the mainstream culture. The closest thing they got to folklore is burning up the lottery money by having a fireworks show on the 4th of July after they've had the local army command bring down a cannon so they can do the 1812 overture again.
Okay. One of those little tangent things that Leo does.
It makes sense to me. I know it makes sense to some of you out there too, right?
I do actually have a point, though, if you can imagine such a thing, which is that how would other people appreciate a different culture if they couldn't read about it? Well, or see videos or whatever. I understand your context about the dominant culture and the way that it imposes
dominating
values.
culture, yeah, it's dominating culture, but it's still up for grabs. Culture, it's up for grabs.
I understand your point about the context, and
I'm glad.
If we separate that particular context, would it be true in all places at all times that someone, presumably reasonably scholarly, studying a culture that is other than their culture and writing about it is insulting? Is that always the case?
I think it's in the case if a part of the subtext of the entire act of writing and producing and publishing and disseminating, if the subtext to that entire process were not a subtext which includes sort of absorbing in order to neutralize.
Okay, so that's the context in your particular example. So
of course, and I was only talking about my example. So.
Well, that's why I was asking the more general question: is would it be true in all? So, but you're saying no, it's not necessarily true. But it is true in this context, this particular example.
Well, I wouldn't have thought it was true in this example. If I wouldn't have thought that, I wouldn't have written it, would I?
Now you're just being difficult.
Okay, well, no, I have more to this. You see, these were excerpts of a whole piece,
Well,
and what I go on to say is that if a culture can be broken down into folkloric elements, it is perceived by the arbiters of the mainstream to be of less value and relevance than the mainstream culture, which appears to be a seamless whole due to its lack of discrete cultural units. However, this mainstream culture is actually not a culture, but an assortment of symbiotic social, political, economic reflexes based on getting to, into, out of, and home from the McDonald's in one piece with enough pseudo-chow to sate the family's appetite.
Well, indeed, it's capitalism generates a particularly shallow culture. because it destroys individual
Yeah, I mean,
creativity by subjecting everything to the
so
market.
shallow that
That's
it's like calling it a culture is like saying you got a navy when you got a bunch of boats out there like stuck in the mud.
That's true. But don't you suppose that Japanese people come to America and write books about, something called American culture, which they then sell in Japan to Japanese people who are curious, in which they break
Well, they're
down.
not doing very good books, man, because just about all the cats I've seen wearing their, from Japan who come over to buy Levi's are still getting them about 3 sizes too big.
That's so they can fit in with the guys on skateboards.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. But what I'm wondering, but that's just a different example. Would it be true that those books in Japan are necessarily insulting to Americans?
Not necessarily insulting to Americans, which, again, I suppose that when we speak of Americans in this context, we're not referring to individuals. We're referring to an entirely large group, generally referenced by their citizenship and generally by their cultural behavior. And I would think that if they are writing about what is perceived internationally as the attractive elements of the so-called American dream, then they're dealing with a phenomenon which is so base as to generally not be able to be insulted.
Ooh. Okay, that was good.
Thank you.
But I also wonder about appreciating culture. I mean, because there's probably a sense, accepting your criticisms of the dominant culture,
Dominating, yeah.
our criticisms anyway, that
Well, they're different. They're different because you
that-
still say dominant, whereas I say dominating, and that right there
That's
shows a
just
sort of
our
difference. So that could be
lingo.
another.
All
No,
right.
there's more
Well-
to it than that. It's deeper than that. But go on.
okay, but this, well,
Spit it out.
I'm not convinced that most people running around the country experience their culture as dominating.
Of course not. And that right there shows the identification with the oppressor, which is an integral and intrinsic part of popular Eurogenic culture. That it is unreflective of itself. It sees itself as the temperature at which all water should always be at. You don't feel your body temperature at 98.6. If it turns 98.6 outside, you know what it is, that it's hot out, it's warm out. But you don't feel your own inside, even though it's just because it's like a sound that you become inured to. You're used to it. And that's the attitude, is that which is considered the culture of the American dream, that stuff is perceived as normal by the overwhelming majority of people who are a part of it. And many of them even claim to be involved in some sort of progressive or solidarity activities with people that don't come out of that bag.
But you're portraying what you call the dominating culture as being this somehow monolithic whole, and that's not realistic. I mean, that's
not
the
when
way
we break it down to
is.
the level of individuals. But if you're going to talk about a culture, you have to functionally, make certain generalizations.
What I want to suggest is that people running around America do experience the culture as being shallow. That they know that, and therefore books like you're talking about sell because they're interested in other cultures. We've actually touched on
I
this
tend to
before,
think that it's more of a
white
hunger.
people going to Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, I think
celebrations.
that it's more of a certain kind of hunger for something, but they don't know. It's
Something
kind of
meaningful.
kind of like people who are going around thirsty, not because they know that their body needs more water. They're just thirsty, so they drink. There's a vast difference between, like they say that you will eat like some kind of fruit, for example, have a craving for some kind of fruit because you need certain kinds of stuff inside of your body, right? Certain minerals, vitamins, whatever it may be.
Right.
And I think that they're going after culture more for that reason, with an unreflective and very reflexive, instinctive hunger for an experience that they're otherwise lacking. But I don't think that they're doing it necessarily so very reflectively that they would be able to make value judgments.
I'm not suggesting that it's reflective. I'm just suggesting that people are doing it. Yes,
Yeah.
because they're hungry.
Yeah.
And they may not identify the source
They
of the
may
hunger.
not know the hunger.
But you, in particular, I would think, should see the value in that.
Oh, I see the
Because
value in it as
you're
long as they don't want to go.
propagandizing your culture in this dominating culture, which, according to the way you portray things, your understanding of the world, this would be one of those places where we disagree, but I'll caricature your opinion.
Okay, go ahead.
I would predict that you would say that these books about your culture should have a positive effect on the dominating culture by making it more appreciative of what it's actually doing.
Well, if it were not for the cultural imperative to, it's like somebody's writing about my fishing hole,
right?
And people are
that's
showing,
a secret.
and people are showing up with, no, I don't mind sharing the fishing hole as long as you don't come in
with 10,000 people.
with 150 horse. No, just one person with 150 horsepower Evinrude motor, going blasting back and forth and tearing up all of the reeds and the grasses and muddying the whole place up and scaring away the few fish that they don't chop up with this huge, turbine of a motor. You see, that's what the problem is. Look at Taos. People like Taos. Well, what was her name? George O'Keeffe and all of them wrote all these books, and the guy who was the tubercular cat, right? D.H. Lawrence.
Really?
Yeah.
In Taos?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they brought him in. They wrote about it. It was cool. You know what happened? Now you go to Taos, and they like our culture so much. The last time I was in the parking lot that they have turned the plaza that used to have trees and old people into. Anyhow, the last time I was there I saw their appreciation of our culture manifested by someone having taken and shown us the honor of painting La Tonantzin, known by the Christians as the Virgen de Guadalupe, on a trash can. Now, I saw, obviously we were dealing with serious, tantric practitioners who realized, come on.
Well,
I walked into Michael Martin Murphy's bar, and the first thing you see is a life-sized crucifixion. Here's a life-sized, Rococo, dead Jesus of Nazareth,
right.
Done pretty anatomically correct.
Bleeding and everything.
Oh, yeah, gosh, the whole nine yards.
I had a Catholic friend called that Hamburger Jesus.
The first thing you see when you come into the bar is this. Now, I'm not a Christian.
Right.
However, I know how to show respect, and one of the ways that you don't show, that would be like, I don't know, nailing a cow to a wall at McDonald's in the middle of New Delhi.
Tacky.
Beyond that.
But see, aren't you coming around to my point of view, though? Because I'm the one who says that the market destroys everything.
I never said the market didn't destroy anything. It's just because I agree with you that the market destroys, I'm saying that it is the marketplace from operating within the parameters of this dominating Eurogenic culture.
No. It has nothing to do with what culture it's operating in. The free market destroys things. That's just what it does.
I don't even know what a free market is, because they can call it, or they call this thing, they got a free market right now, but it's got none of the, come on, if the flea market was run like the free market, you'd have a bunch of serious, thug-butt mafiosos running the place, and there wouldn't be nobody be able to step out of line or sell any kind of weird stuff that just wanted to show up and sell their goods, you know what I mean? Come on.
No, the flea market's the bottom of it. I don't think that argument actually carries any water in this particular case. But there's. So, are you really resenting the fact that someone is talking about your culture, or are you resenting the commodification of your culture?
Oh, absolutely, the commodification of it, as well as making a certain comment about the fact that I realize what might otherwise be a good-hearted, productive, involved, accountable exhortation to be involved with the community in a way in which you can be involved in the community, which in the case of our communities means you introduce yourself, you say who you are, what your resources are, and what you're intending to do in town, and you plug into the local community reality rather than, again, coming in with, that 150 horsepower Evinrude and just ripping up the fishing hole.
Is it actually possible for someone to do that, though?
Sure, I could see somebody, they do it all the time.
Look
at Taos.
Well, Actually,
look at Albuquerque. Look at Santa Fe.
But see, you would say those
Ciudad
are
Juarez,
examples of
Tijuana,
where it's been destroyed.
Cuernavaca.
Oh, man.
Come on, check it out.
Cuernavaca's been destroyed. I mean, that's one of my favorite places in the world. Or at least it was. Not anymore.
Acapulco.
Someone built
Taasco.
condos all over the thing.
See what I'm saying?
It's starting to destroy the reef system.
See what I'm saying? So you know, that's what I'm talking about. Were it not for the fact that you know that instead of coming around to be a part of the community and to introduce themselves and to shake hands and to say, you know, when we introduce ourselves traditionally, whenever I'm introduced to one of my elders, somebody I know is of the culture, younger people as well, who I know are like mature people of the community, when I introduce myself, I always say, para servirle, a su servicio, meaning, in the context of the culture, I am there to function in the culture, and I am a newcomer, and you tell me what to do, and I'll do that. At your service, to serve you, but not in a subservient way, not in a demeaning way. When I say a su servicio, then it's very different. We function in the context of the community, and that's what concerns me so much about this process of the commodification of our culture, is that because of the hunger that you described, people come out and they stomp around gluttonously and without realizing that it's sort of like the surface of the tundra. There's a very delicate kind of tissue that holds it all together, and you can't, people go up into the Arctic and they think they can just stomp around, and now folks are beginning to learn how very delicate that layer of permafrost is and what it means for the survival of that area. And culturally, we're in very, very similar circumstances, very similar kind of situation, where a very, very delicate tissue is being stomped on, and all people got to do is show goodwill. Shake hands, introduce yourself, say what are your intentions, and offer your resources to the community in a respectful and responsible way.
Yeah, but how do you know the guy who wrote this book didn't do that? Or woman, whoever wrote the book?
I'm not saying that they may not even have meant that. I wasn't saying so much that it was necessarily the author, though the way that the author avoids it precisely the subject I am raising.
He doesn't tell people that this is what you should do.
Right. Now, and there's a precedent. There's an excellent book that was put out by John Muir Publications years ago, The People's Guide to Mexico, which discusses how to interact with the culture, and how to deal, for example, with the marketplace in an appropriate way, how to go into a restaurant in an appropriate way. They didn't tell you they didn't tell you where to go, but they explained to you how to get there, which is precisely the kinds of things that the authors to this particular book could have done, and shown that there is a way to be responsible and responsive to the community instead of just driving around acting like some sort of seasonal peeping Tom, and then doing, like I say, perpetrating the sacrilege like Michael Martin Murphy has done with that crucifix on the wall in Taos, or the painting of the Tonantzin, known to the Christians as the Virgen de Guadalupe, on the side of a trash can, those kinds of things. And in other ways, just basically stomping around and making the water dirty when we got precious little enough water just to give our families enough to drink.
And with that, we've come to the end of another show.
And don't forget the phone number. The phone number for the comment line is not what I said it was before, and that what Richard agreed with me. 447-9911. 447-9911. And don't forget to get a hold of us via email at
ocotl@aol.com.
That's Okot.
ocotl
at AOL.com. That's the one.
It's COM. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
This is Antithesis, a weekly feature of KGNU, 5:30 to 6 on Sundays.
And it'll be around as long as you want it to if you really make a bunch of noise. So get out there, get rowdy, and have fun. That's what it's all about anyhow.
And that was Antithesis, and as you heard, you can hear that every Sunday afternoon from 5:30 to 6 o'clock. This is KGNU Boulder 88.5 FM with translator K260 AC in Fort